Alright, welcome to Fantasy Bankroll Episode 3. I'm your host, Robert Banker. First, I want to say thank you to anybody who's liked, subscribed, or interacted with the channel at all over the first few episodes. Your feedback really helps me know which way to take things, so I appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, please do when you get a chance. It helps grow the channel. Alright, today we're talking wide receivers. We're going to look at the rookie wide receivers. We're going to look at my wide receiver scoring tiers. We're going to do a way too early 2025 look. But as we always do, first let's kick things off by looking back to see how the wide receivers finished up the 2024 season. Let's go. Alright, let's check out the final wide receiver rankings for the 2024 season. Now first, let's talk about some of the surprises from last year. This guy was going into his sixth season ranked as wide receiver 33, and while his targets, receptions, and yards all stayed similar to his career averages, he scored 13 touchdowns last season, which was one less than he had the previous 3 seasons combined, before finishing as wide receiver 7 to end the season. I'm talking about the top weapon for Jaden Daniels in Washington, Terry McLaurin. Now while he isn't showing up for mandatory minicamp while he waits on a new contract to get done, once they figure that out, Scary Terry should be back as the top dog for the Commanders this season. The next guy to surprise started last season as wide receiver 39, but was a target monster last year, receiving double-digit targets in 6 games, which was top 5 in the league at the receiver position. I'm talking about Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He showed a knack for finding space and creating after the catch, pulling in 100 catches for 6 touchdowns, finishing as wide receiver 9. He'll have a new running mate at wide receiver in Cooper Kupp and quarterback in Sam Darnold for 2025, but he should still be an early round target for fantasy GMs this season. Our next surprise was wide receiver 47 to start his rookie year, before coming in at wide receiver 12 to end the season, really showcasing his talents in the playoff loss to the Texans with 9 catches for 197 yards and 1 touchdown. I'm obviously talking about McConkey. And another year in the offense and working with Justin Herbert should only make him more comfortable and a top target in fantasy drafts for the 2025 season. No one was ever denying that our biggest surprise was a talented receiver, and that's why he was a first-round pick last year. But fantasy GMs weren't sure what they were going to get from him in his first year, and a large reason why he started the season as wide receiver 41, before blowing up and finishing as wide receiver 4. But with even more talent added around Brian Thomas Jr. and a healthy Trevor Lawrence, the sky is truly the limit for him this season, and he should be gone by the second round in most fantasy drafts. Now, who were some of our disappointments from last year? This guy was going as wide receiver 18, which, as you'll see in my wide receiver scoring tier list next segment, you should be expecting around 222.66 points from a player drafted in that position. But this player only ended up scoring 4 total touchdowns on the season and finished as wide receiver 44. I'm talking about Deebo Samuel. He's now in Washington, and if he stays healthy, he should have a better 2025 season. But there's no denying last year was a letdown. The next player to disappoint was only a rookie, but he was being drafted as high as wide receiver 8. He started the season with some up and down games before finding some consistency as the season went on and got more comfortable in the Cardinals offense, leading to Marvin Harrison Jr. finishing as wide receiver 30. But when you're going in the top 10 at your position and finish outside the top 25, it's always going to be a disappointment for fantasy GMs. It's always tough to say it's a disappointment when you draft players with injuries and uncertainty around them. Is the first round quarterback throwing to your receiver going to stay healthy the entire year? Can he even play at an elite level and get the ball where he needs to? Is the elite weapon at running back that helps take some of the heat off your guy going to stay healthy for a full season? Last year, the answer to those questions were not what fantasy GMs nor Michael Pittman Jr. wanted, and a big part of the reason why, despite a wide receiver 15 ranking going into last season, he only gave fantasy GMs 3 touchdowns for the year and finished as wide receiver 41. He's shown flashes in the past, but without consistent play around him, it'll be hard to know if you're getting a disappointment or surprise player in Pittman every year. I don't know if you know this yet, but ADP matters in the letdown game, and this guy falls right into that category. Prior to last season, he was being drafted as wide receiver 13. But as he has every single season since winning the Triple Crown in 2021, he's missed at least 5 games. And that's a big reason why Cooper Kupp ended up as wide receiver 38 last season. And why he'll be playing his home games further north this year after being released by the Rams and joining the Seahawks. Last season was a letdown for the former Triple Crown winner and fantasy GMs alike. I'll put these last 2 fantasy disappointments back to back for a reason. It's because they were being drafted back-to-back last year as wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 13. And did I mention ADP matters when it comes to letdowns? Well, it does. I know Chris Olave missed half the season with injuries, and that's something no one can help. But these are the draft misses that can ruin your season before it even gets started. When fantasy GMs draft anyone in the second or third round, you're expecting them to be a major points contributor to your fantasy team, and not someone who finishes as wide receiver 93. And as with every player on this list, he'll be hoping for a much better season in 2025. All right, that was a quick look back at how the wide receivers finished up the 2024 season. Leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. Did I miss any surprises or disappointments that you would have put on the list? All right, next we're going to take a look at my wide receiver scoring tier list, which is a fantasy draft tool that I've been talking about the last few episodes. Let's check it out. All right, here's my wide receiver scoring tiers. Obviously, and as with the previous list, tier 1 is the highest scoring players. And there's a large drop from tier 1 to tier 2 of 58.35 points. But where things really get interesting with the wide receiver scoring tiers is that from tier 2 to tier 9, it's only just over a 100-point drop. And I think this is really highlighted in tiers 5 through 8, where the point differential is no more than 11 points per tier, meaning that if you miss out on a player in tier 5, you're not really missing out on much to grab a player in tier 6. So say you need to take the last tier 2 running back and pass up on a tier 3 receiver. You'll know that grabbing a tier 4 guy in the next round is only going to cost you about 18 points. Again, you can combine this with the other tier list to see when you should be targeting certain players in certain rounds. If you do miss out on a certain player or position, you'll know what you're looking at for next round. And as I continue to reiterate, these scoring tiers are just a tool for you to use with your other draft information to help give you an idea of when you should be targeting certain players and what you missed out on by passing on certain players. All right, that was my wide receiver scoring tier list. Again, you can just use it as a guide during your fantasy draft to see when the point drop-offs are from grouping to grouping. Next, we're going to take a look at the rookie wide receivers and see if there's anybody that's going to be worth your time during fantasy drafts. Let's check them out. All right, let's take a look at the rookie receivers from the 2025 draft. Starting off, we have Travis Hunter going to the Jacksonville Jaguars with the second pick in the first round. The Heisman winner wants to try to play both ways this season, but it sounds like he's going to be handling more snaps on offense than defense to start the year. And with last year's super rookie Brian Thomas Jr. on the other side, Hunter should see his fair share of single coverage during the rookie season. At least until he shows defensive coordinators he needs more attention. I currently have him ranked 23rd in my top 30 way too early wide receiver rankings that we'll be taking a look at later in the show. Next we had Teteroa McMillan going to the Carolina Panthers in the first round with the 13th pick. He's coming into an offense that was ranked 31st in passing last season. And Adam Thielen mainly operates out at the slot, and he openly contemplated retirement during the offseason, so he's clearly on his last leg. And in his first year, Xavier Legette led the receiver room in snaps, but was only able to turn it into 49 catches for 479 yards and 4 touchdowns. So with no clear-cut number 1 for Bryce Young to throw to, Teteroa should be positioned to get a lot of targets early, and a reason why I have him ranked 21st on my way too early wide receiver rankings. Next in the first round, we had Emeka Egbuka going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with the 19th pick. Egbuka is extremely talented, and he will see the field this season, but how much is up in the air? He'll be fighting with last year's third-round pick, Jalen McMillan, for wide receiver 3 snaps. And while he should get the nod early based on his first-round pick status, he'll need to show that he can do in Tampa Bay what he did in Columbus for the past 3 years. Either way this season, he will get the benefit of learning from some great players in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. The last receiver taken in the first round was Matthew Golden by the Green Bay Packers with the 23rd pick. And he should see some playing time early opposite Jaden Reed, but he is in an offense with a lot of talent around him, which could limit his opportunities early in the season while he's getting his footing as a pro. One thing that he doesn't have to worry about figuring out is his 4.29 speed. And lucky for him, he has a quarterback with a strong arm that can get him the ball down the field for some explosive plays, making him an interesting mid to late round pick in fantasy drafts. The first receiver taken in the second round was Jaden Higgins. He was one of 2 star receivers coming out of Iowa State in this year's draft, both of whom ended up with the Texans. He's someone I think can have a bright future, and he'll benefit from learning from a strong receiver room with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Christian Kirk, which should take some pressure off him to start the season. But between Collins and Dell, they've never completed a full season, and Kirk has only played in every game in 2 of his 7 seasons. So there's a really good chance that if he can pick things up quickly, he sees some serious playing time this season, landing him as a potential late-round target for your fantasy teams, especially in leagues with 12 or more teams. 5 picks later in the second round, the Chicago Bears selected Luther Burden. Burden's in a similar situation to Golden in Green Bay. He's in an offense with a lot of talent around him, and that could take away from his opportunities early in the season. He wasn't even the highest drafted offensive skill player for the Bears in the draft. That distinction goes to Colston Loveland, who Chicago took in the first round. He'll need to find his place in the offense, and we'll have to see how long that takes. And at this point, I'd say he's more of an undrafted free agent while he finds his footing. And with the 23rd pick in the second round, the Los Angeles Chargers selected Trey Harris. And while he's not the fastest guy, he knows how to create separation and has been productive. Quentin Johnston's been a disappointment, and Harris could see some time early for the Chargers, with Ladd McConkey working mainly in the slot and Mike Williams as the other guy on the outside. Add in first-round pick Omarion Hampton as someone who's going to take some focus from defenses, and Harris could see some room to operate this year. But will it be enough for you to look at him in your fantasy drafts? We'll see how things look come August when it's time for some final rankings, but at this point I'd say he's more a late-round target or undrafted guy, except in those deeper leagues. The last receiver taken in the second round was Jack Beck by the Las Vegas Raiders with the 26th pick. One of my favorite late-round receivers, Beck could see a large role in the Raiders' offense this season. Last year's Rookie of the Year, Brock Bowers, this year's first-round pick, Ashton Jeanty, and even last year's leading receiver, Jacoby Myers, will certainly see defenses keyed on them for the majority of the season, which should allow other players to see a lot of single coverage. And I think similar to McConkey for the Chargers last season, although not to the same level, Beck and his versatility could be someone that new quarterback Geno Smith looks to often, making him an intriguing late-round stash in your fantasy drafts. The first receiver taken in the third round was Kyle Williams by the New England Patriots with the 5th pick. Williams is another guy who could see time early on in a receiver room that has seen a lot of changes, with 3 of the top 6 wideouts being new to the team. The one returning starter, Demario Douglas, is going into his 3rd season, and he's shown he's more suited for a complementary role. And Stephon Diggs is coming off an injury and is clearly not the elite number 1 wideout that he used to be. And while Williams should have a large role, he's coming into a passing offense that was dead last in the league last year. So the question is, how many of Drake May's pass attempts? With the very next pick in the 3rd round, the Detroit Lions selected Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas. He's mainly a big slot guy who doesn't have the top end speed, but he can find the holes in the zones and be a good underneath target for his quarterback. The problem he's going to face this year is that Amon-Ra St. Brown plays 2/3 of his snaps from the slot, which would be Tesla's best position. The positive is that he gets to learn from one of the best at the position in the NFL. Either way, when it comes to fantasy, he isn't someone you should be targeting in your drafts this season. All right, that was the first 10 receivers taken in this year's NFL draft. Let me know who you're keeping your eyes on for your fantasy teams. All right, next we're going to take a look at my way too early receiver rankings for the 2025 season. Let's check them out. Number 15, T. Higgins. As he has during his entire career, when Higgins was on the field last season, he produced at a high level, pulling in 73 catches for 911 yards and 10 touchdowns. Those 10 touchdowns were the most of his career, and that's with him missing 5 games. And that's been the one big knock on Higgins since he came into the league, is can he stay healthy for an entire season? But let's take a look and see what fantasy GMs have gotten from Higgins when he's been healthy and been on the field. Receiver 1A in Cincinnati, as Jamar Chase called him, has given fantasy GMs an average of 66 catches, 919 yards, and 7 touchdowns per season. Even though he did have the most touchdowns of his career last season, he did miss some time, and that's something fantasy GMs do have to account for, as he's averaged 3 missed games per season. Cincinnati's going to throw the ball a lot, and if he can get through the season fully healthy, and I think he does this year, there's a good chance we could see the best numbers of his career. And now that there's no contract drama, at least for him, it's only football for the next few seasons, and he should continue to be a top wide receiver target during your fantasy drafts. Number 14, Ladd McConkey. The second-round pick out of Georgia had an outstanding rookie season and quickly established himself as Justin Herbert's go-to receiver, pulling in 82 catches for 1,149 yards and 7 touchdowns, and that's with him missing a game during the middle of the season. Now, he does get unfairly labeled as a slot-only receiver, and we all know why. It's because he wears number 15, and former slot receiver Golden Tate wore number 15 for part of his career, so it's an easy connection to make, but he did play almost a third of his snaps out wide last season. Now, let's take a look at some other stats for McConkey. McConkey finished the season with 112 targets, and it's only one season, but his 10.26 yards per target is the second best of all time with a minimum of 100 targets. He produced at a high level while having a relatively low target share percentage of 19%, which ranked 57th last season. And that should only go up this season, which bodes well for a more productive season if you're looking to add McConkey to your fantasy roster. And you should be. Number 13, Mike Evans. All right, future Hall of Famer Evans recorded his 11th straight 1,000-yard season to start his career, tying another Hall of Famer in Jerry Rice. And anytime you're in the conversation with the GOAT, you've done something crazy good. He recorded 74 passes for 1,004 yards and 11 touchdowns on the season. Now, you know he stays healthy, you know he produces consistently, but let's take a look and see what that averages look like for your fantasy team. Evans has a career average of 76 receptions, 1,162 yards, and 10 touchdowns per season. And you don't have numbers like that without staying healthy and being consistent. The fact that he's never had 100 receptions in a season, but is the active receiving touchdown leader with 105 receiving touchdowns, it shows you what kind of player he's been for his career. A red zone jump ball target, it's going to get you 1,000 or more yards, and damn near double-digit touchdowns every year. The Bucs have added some young talent in the receiver room with Evans, which will only help take some of the pressure off him this season. And if he could stay relatively healthy like he has his entire career, that 105 touchdowns should be closer to 115 at the end of the season. Number 12, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Number 12. Smith-Njigba was one of 6 first or second year players to finish in the top 12 for fantasy scoring for wide receivers last season. Talk about a youth movement. He pulled in 100 passes for 1,130 yards and 6 touchdowns. He started the season slow, but over the final 9 weeks he caught fire, recording 5 top 15 scoring weeks. And this season he'll team with Cooper Kupp to catch passes from new quarterback Sam Darnold. So let's take a look at his averages over the first 2 years. You've got an average of 82 receptions, 879 yards, and 5 touchdowns over his first 2 years in the league. But Smith-Njigba took a huge step last season where his targets, receptions, routes per game, yards per route, yards per game, and catch percentage were all up from his rookie season. He clearly looked more comfortable in the offense down the stretch, and another offseason should only help the confidence going into year 3 for Smith-Njigba. And you can be confident that if you draft him, you'll be getting a solid performer for your fantasy team this season. Number 11, Terry McLaurin. Last season started slowly for McLaurin. After the first 2 weeks, he only had 8 catches for 39 yards and 0 touchdowns. But the rest of the way, he averaged 5 catches for 70 yards and almost 1 touchdown a game, to finish the season with 82 catches for 1,096 yards and 13 touchdowns. The team added Deebo Samuel from the 49ers in the offseason, and that should help take some of the pressure off McLaurin for this upcoming season. Now let's take a look and see what you've gotten as an average from him as a fantasy. After missing a few games early in his career, Scary Terry has been a consistent and healthy presence for the Commanders' offense, averaging 77 receptions, 1,063 yards, and 6 touchdowns per season. But for most of his career, McLaurin has dealt with inconsistent quarterback play. So there's a good reason to think, after his outstanding rookie season, Jaden Daniels and McLaurin are only going to look better in year 2 together. And you should feel confident in drafting McLaurin in your fantasy drafts this year. Number 10, Drake London. London really enjoyed a breakout third season, pulling in 100 catches for 1,271 yards and 9 touchdowns, finishing as wide receiver 5 in fantasy scoring. His routes and yards per game, as well as his catch percentage, have all gone up every single season since he's been in the league. The good news is he had 2 of his best games after Michael Penix took over last year, which is a good sign going into the 2025 season for fantasy GMs. Now let's take a look at his averages during his career. I think we'll see stats closer to what we saw last year from London, but for his career, he's given your fantasy team 80 receptions, 1,014 yards, and 5 touchdowns per season. And other than Bijan Robinson, there isn't someone stealing a lot of targets from London, so he should enjoy a high target share again this season after finishing 9th last year with a 27.7 target share percentage. And if he clicks with new quarterback Michael Penix Jr., there's no reason he shouldn't finish as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver this season. Number 9, A.J. Brown. Seasons with the Eagles were injury-free, before missing 4 games early last season. And despite that, he still put up a respectable 67 catches for 1,079 yards and 7 touchdowns. Now, Brown had finished as wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 6 in fantasy scoring in his first 2 seasons in Philadelphia, and I'd expect something much closer to that finish this year than the wide receiver 20 we got from him last year. Now let's see what Brown can do for you. Yo, UPS, hit me up about a sponsorship. Let me... Not only has Brown been consistent in Philly, he's been fairly consistent his entire career, including his time in Tennessee, where he's given fantasy GMs an average of 74 catches, 1,170 yards, and 8 touchdowns per season. Despite missing some games last season, his catch percentage was the highest of his career, and routes per game and yards per target were both the second highest of his career. So there's a really good chance that as long as he stays healthy, you can expect finishes more like the previous 2 seasons, where he's finished as wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 6. And he should continue to be a top target during your fantasy drafts this season. Number 8, Nico Collins. After 2 lackluster seasons to begin his career, Collins enjoyed a breakout 2023 campaign, and that thrust him into the low-end wide receiver 1 conversation for the 2024 season. And things started off relatively well, with him finishing in the top 5 scoring twice in the first 5 weeks. However, injuries in the middle of the season caused him to miss 5 games, and he finished with 68 catches for 1,006 yards and 7 touchdowns on the season. Now let's take a look at his career stats. During his 4 seasons in the league, Collins has given you an average of 55 receptions, 808 yards, and 4 touchdowns. But let's break that down into his first 2 seasons and his last 2 seasons to get a better understanding of his growth in the offense. During his first 2 seasons, his average was 35 catches for 464 yards and 2 touchdowns. Where in his last 2 seasons, those numbers have jumped to 74 catches, 1,152 yards, and 8 touchdowns per season. Collins hasn't played in a full season since joining the league, and despite that, he's put up good numbers over the past 2 seasons. And if he can get through a full season healthy, he can be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Number 7, Brian Thomas Jr. Despite being drafted in the first round, Thomas was a fantasy afterthought going into last season, being projected in the wide receiver 35 to 40 range before exploding onto the scene with 87 catches for 1,282 yards and 10 touchdowns, finishing as you saw in the recap as wide receiver 4. Now let's look a little deeper at Thomas's rookie season. Thomas put those numbers up with Trevor Lawrence missing 7 games last season, which meant that for almost half the year he was catching passes from Mac Jones. And no offense to Jones, but there's a reason he's no longer starting in the league. So as a fantasy GM, there's a good reason to believe that if Lawrence is back healthy, that Thomas can have an even better sophomore season as a wide receiver 1 for your fantasy team. And he should clearly be targeted in the first few rounds of your fantasy drafts. Number 6, Puka Nacua. After his breakout rookie campaign, Nacua was slated as wide receiver 9 going into last season, but unfortunately he dealt with some injuries and missed 6 games. And despite that, his yards per catch, catch percentage, and routes ran per game were all up from his rookie season. And he still managed to haul in 79 catches for 990 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now let's take a look at his 2-year averages. Even with the injuries included last season, Nacua has averaged 92 receptions, 1,238 yards, and 5 touchdowns through his first 2 years in the league. During that time, Nacua has averaged a 29.3 target share percentage, which is top 5 in the league during that span. And with Davante Adams taking away some of the heat on the other side, if he's healthy the entire season, he's shown he can definitely produce as a wide receiver 1 for your fantasy team in 2025. Number 5, Malik Nabers. Despite playing in a passing attack that ranked bottom 5 in the league, Nabers burst onto the scene during his rookie year with 109 catches for 1,204 yards and 7 touchdowns. And he had 170 targets, which was second in the league to only Jamar Chase. And he did all of that while missing 2 games early while in concussion protocol. Now let's take a deeper look at his rookie season. Nabers led the league in target share percentage last year with a ridiculous 35.3%. And with some slightly better stability at the quarterback position going into the 2025 season, it's easy to think that Nabers is in line for similar, if not better, production in his second season. And he should be someone you're looking at in the first few rounds of fantasy drafts this year. Number 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown. St. Brown has finished as wide receiver 3 the past 2 seasons. Although last year did see a slight dip in his targets, yards, and receptions from 2023, he still managed to pull in 115 catches for 1,263 yards on 141 targets. He did increase his touchdowns from 10 in 2023 to 12 last season, which you will always take in fantasy. Now let's take a look at his career averages. In his first 4 seasons, St. Brown hasn't missed a game, and he's given fantasy GMs a consistent player for their roster, averaging 108 catches, 1,213 yards, and 8 touchdowns on an average of 141 targets during that time. St. Brown is in one of the NFL's top offenses and has routinely produced, and I see no reason to think that changes this year. If he's available when you're drafting, he's an excellent choice for your team, and you shouldn't hesitate to pick him. Number 3, CeeDee Lamb. Even playing with 3 different quarterbacks and missing the last 2 games of the season with an AC joint sprain, Lamb still managed to haul in 101 catches for 1,194 yards and 6 touchdowns last season, finishing as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. And he still had a high target share, finishing 11th in the league at 27.3%, which is what you want from your number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. Now let's take a look at Lamb's career averages to get a better understanding of what he brings to your fantasy roster. Lamb's been steadily improving every year since he was drafted, and while his numbers did take a hit last season with the injuries to the quarterback position, he's still given fantasy GMs a solid 104 catches for 1,330 yards and 8 touchdowns per season over his first 5 seasons. Even though it hasn't mattered who's throwing him the ball, if Dak can stay healthy, that gives Lamb the best chance to be a high-end wide receiver 1 for your fantasy team again this upseason, and someone who's an excellent target during the first few rounds of your fantasy drafts. Number 2, Justin Jefferson. In the seasons where Jefferson stayed healthy, he's finished 6th, 4th, 1st, and 2nd in wide receiver fantasy scoring. That second place finish last year included 103 receptions for 1,533 yards and 10 touchdowns. And he was one of only 3 players to record over a 30% target share. Highlighting just how consistent he's been since entering the league, he currently holds the all-time NFL record for yards per game at 96.5. Now let's take a look at his career averages that made him one of the best fantasy football options ever. In the seasons Jet has played more than 10 games, he's averaged 107 receptions, 1,590 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And even the season he missed 7 games, he still managed to hit the 1,000-yard mark and score 5 touchdowns, finishing as wide receiver 33 that year. So it doesn't matter if he's hurt or who's throwing him the ball. Since entering the league, Jefferson has been one of the most consistent fantasy options available, and if you get a chance to add him to your team, you better pull the trigger. Number 1, Ja'Marr Chase. Number Chase was the only non-quarterback to finish in the top 5 overall scoring last season, and the only wide receiver in the top 10. He obviously won the Triple Crown, becoming only the 3rd player to do so this century with 127 catches, 1,708 yards, and 17 touchdowns. Those 127 catches were good enough for 9th all-time in a season, and his 17 touchdowns tied a Bengals team record set back in 1995 by my man Carl Pickens. What up, Pick? And was also good enough for 6th all-time in a season. Needless to say, last season was amazing statistically for Chase, but let's see what he's brought to your team as a fantasy GM during his time in the league. Let's take a look and see what you've gotten from last year's Triple Crown winner as a fantasy GM during his first 4 years in the league. Chase has been elite since he was drafted, averaging 99 receptions, 1,356 yards, and 12 touchdowns per season. Chase's targets and receptions have increased every year he's been in the league, and while that trend can't continue forever, it's a safe bet that his targets will be north of 150 next season. Chase will start the 2025 season ranked exactly where he finished the 2024 season, as the number 1 non-quarterback fantasy option. And you don't need me to tell you that you'd be an idiot not to draft him if he's available in your fantasy draft. So don't be an idiot. All right, let's take a quick look at the rest of the wide receiver list. As you can see from 16 on, it's a mix of veterans and young guys. And this is a way too early list, so some of these players might end up in the top 15 come August, and some of the top 15 might end up a little bit lower. We'll have to see if there's injuries or how people are looking during camp. But what do you think? Leave me a comment, let me know where you guys have some of these players ranked at. Okay, that was my way too early wide receiver rankings for the 2025 season. Now, we know things are going to change come August due to injuries, breakouts, and disappointments, but it's always fun to look at things early. And that'll do it for today's episode, but make sure you check out next episode where I'll be looking at the tight ends. And again, if you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about today's episode. And let's keep getting ready to win those fantasy leagues together. Let's go!